Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You are the CEO and co-founder of Doppler, amongst many other things, but I'm really excited to talk to you today. We're going to have some fun.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on here. I'm super excited.
Likewise. So I, some things that really jumped out at me and, we'll obviously get into it a little bit. You have kind of a long and storied career as a founder. I'm sure lots of ups and downs as pretty much every entrepreneur does.
Oh, tons.
And so I'm really interested in kind of digging into and hearing your journey to where you are today. But to kind of get started, I want to get to know you and your background a little bit. And I always like to think of it and frame it in kind of the frame of an origin story, right? Like you're this superhero. You have these superpowers and these traits that have shaped you. What in your background do you think has been, most important in shaping who you are today and got you where you are?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say getting good at failing in a lot of different ways has actually been, I think, the biggest thing that has led to the success that we're having so far. And by the way, I think we have a lot more success to have or to earn at Doppler. It's not like we are we're not Google currently. We still have a long way to go before we become that. But yeah, it's really about being okay with failure. And then when that does happen, knowing that the true failure is when you don't learn from it. And I know that's probably been reiterated a lot of times in Silicon Valley, but it's really been the truth for me. This is Doppler, I believe, is startup number 7. And it's really this is a real startup. The ones before felt more like projects now looking back, but at the time they felt like startups. And they all failed in different interesting ways. And there was a lesson on management at some point. There was a lesson on like managing cash. There was lessons on picking the right problem and the right product. And so each one had its own learnings. And when I think you sum up all the learnings together, you get to an opportunity like Doppler.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah. So, okay, cool. We're going to talk about learning from failures today. There's a quote that I really like that is attributed to, I think, Thomas Edison, but you never know in the internet these days. It said something like, I haven't failed. I haven't failed 100 times. I have succeeded 100 times at figuring out that was the wrong way to go.
Yeah.
And now I have found the right way to go,
100%.
Obviously that was botching it, right? But the idea that every failure is simply closing a door to something that wasn't going to work and driving you towards the thing that does.
And there's almost always a learning out of each, or not learning, but the next thing to work on after actually Doppler was a pivot in a way. We started out as a crypto machine learning marketplace and turned into this. And the crypto machine learning marketplace completely, utterly failed by every metric and account you can point at. It failed, and born out of that was this beautiful SecretOps platform that we have today. And so it wasn't there was this big failure and then you're on to nothing for a long time. It's really okay, I'm actually glad this thing failed, so I can move on to the next thing. And through this, I got this big insight, and that's the next problem I want to go tackle.
Wow. So there's a perseverance and a tenacity that, you have the failure, you don't dwell on it, and you just keep moving forward.
If you're going to be a founder in life, you have to have two things. One, you have to have a fundamental belief that you're going to make it. Because if you don't have that, what's the point of even trying? And the second belief is you have to be okay with failing and knowing that the next one could potentially be it. And so really, I think when I saw this a lot when I was growing up, someone would fail at something and they're like, this is the end of the world. This is the worst part of their life. And versus I've always been okay, on to the next one. What did I learn from it? That's great. Check that one off check that box. That is not a product I can build or a market I can go after. Moving on to the next thing. And when you keep that mindset, it's almost oh, wow, I'm actually making progress in my failures because I know eventually I'm going to find the one that I'm really, really good at doing. And that one's going to make us really successful.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, so kind of you always knew that you were going to be an entrepreneur at some point. When you took that first leap to start that first company, what was that like?
Actually, I think the first time that I really got into it was not actually at a company. It was something different. It was breaking the rules in a way, or it felt like breaking the rules. So I was in middle school and I had the Motorola Razr. If anyone remembers that phone, it's one of the coolest design phones in my opinion. It was a flip phone. And I was walking to school with my friend and he was like, wouldn't it be so great if we could play a movie on this phone? And this is before the days of iPhones when you could do that kind of thing. And I was like, why can't you? Yeah, I mean, we have an SD card, we have a camera, so obviously it can do playback. And when I went home and I ripped a DVD, which you're not really supposed to do, but did anyways, and found out what the right format it was recording on the phone was, and then converted that ripped DVD or that movie file to that format and put it on my phone, came the next day to my friend and showed him a full length movie on this like Razor on this tiny little screen. And it was like this first moment of like, oh, maybe we can actually do things that weren't just like handed to us. Like that wasn't in the rule set. Like there was no guide in the Razor like handbook on like how to put a movie on a phone. You just like, you could figure it out. And that I think was the first moment where I was like, oh man, there's a whole lot more possibilities than the ones that people are just telling me, if I can just think about it in an interesting way.
Wow. So a rule breaker. All right. I'm starting to see the picture here.
Yeah. Right? And it's not like rules of like go to jail rules. It's more just like, I guess it's like really understanding what are rules and what aren't. I think that's the key learning. Like in school, like at least where I went to school, it was very much like do your homework, but they didn't say you couldn't do other things, right? They just said it was like do this, but they weren't telling you what you can't do. And I think that's the really interesting space for you to go and innovate is like when there's nothing there and you can go put something there.
They're explicit rules and then they're implicit sort of norms, right?
Yeah. So like actually a good example of this would be the first company I did, like the first true one. It was basically like Google Docs for coding. Now there's tons of these sites that do it today, but back then there wasn't. And I was actually an intern in high school working for this tech company called ParkMe. And on the side, I wanted to work on this thing because I thought it was like super interesting to be able to do peer programming. And my parents were very simple about the rules. They were like, you got to go to school, you got to get good grades. My dad was like an absolutist on this. It has to be straight A's. You have to have a job if you want to be able to pay for the car because they're not going to pay for the car. They're not going to pay for the gas. And that's it. And as long as you are happy, you are healthy, you are getting good grades, and you have a job, you're good. And obviously the job had some rules. You got to show up on time. You got to do the work at a high enough caliber and so on. But there was nothing saying I couldn't do this other thing. And so in that space, I was like, oh, I want to work on this interesting thing of making peer programming better.
Yeah. So that is sort of, I mean, if you could sum up the nature of an entrepreneur, it's zigging when others zag, right? Bucking the herd.
Exactly. And like a really good example, I think, of this is like you can see this almost in like physics. So a good if you like have you ever seen those videos where like it's like a constant zoom out function and it's like it starts with like a person on the grass and then you zoom out to the planet, then you zoom out to the galaxy and so on. And you realize that like once you get outside of Earth, there's like so much space, right? Like so much emptiness, and that emptiness is opportunity, right? You could put I don't know, a space hotel up there, right? There's so much space for you to do that, and that could be monetized or something. Yeah. And so I think good entrepreneurs look at the space as opportunity, not as nothingness.
There's actually there's a coach, a friend of mine who, if they're listening, they're going to recognize this analogy. He always talks about breaking bottles. So we are stuck in these bottles that are basically our own belief system around what's possible. And so the challenge is always, well, what's the bottle? Where is it? How do you define it? And then how do we break it? And what you basically realize is that you can break these bottles simply by thinking about it and just thinking about a bigger bottle, right? And so I think that's kind of what we're talking about here is there are these rules and norms that we think are rigid because it's just what everybody else is doing. Exactly. But if you just ask that question, if you just have that sort of contrarian mindset to say, well, who says we can't put a movie on a flip phone? Or who says we can't put a hotel in space? Well, nobody. Okay, well, let's try it. And chances are it might fail, but so what? The fun is in trying, right?
I think you actually just touched on the second very important part about this mindset, which is like, it's something one of my mentors taught me of like asking yourself the question, especially in really, really hard times, what is the worst that can happen? And you quickly like kind of realize not much is going to happen. Like a good example of this is like my parents, when the first time I did a company or like the first time I did this, like a serious company, I actually dropped out of school or I went on pause. And my dad was a professor at Cal State LA. And so he was like an absolutist. You got to get a degree. Like he was very, very unhappy with that decision of me leaving school to go do a startup. And he used to say something all the time of something along, and I love my dad. He was great, but like he used to say something along the lines of like, if you don't have a degree, people are going to think you're homeless. Right. And I was like, well, what's the worst that can happen if this startup fails? And I started thinking about it more, and it's like, well, I just go back to school. Like, it's not that bad. It really isn't. And like, or like the saying of like, my parents say this all the time, or they used to, of like 99% of startups fail. It's like, okay, so what's the big deal? Like, and if you actually like keep digging deeper and deeper, you realize something quite interesting, which is that if you pick a big enough challenge, you're almost always going to end up ahead as long as you do things ethically and legally. So a good example of this is like, let's just say, I don't know, for whatever reason, Doppler fails. I can't predict it, but something happens, right? I'm still far better than if I was still at Uber being a software engineer. I have more skills that I learned along the way. I have a bigger network. I have a new awareness of problem sets that I didn't even know about before. Like, I'm so much better set up to be another to run another company than I was if I didn't do it. That's why a lot of times second-time founders get really amazing deals in their seed round of like huge rounds because of this, because they have all this knowledge they're carrying from the previous failure to this next one.
So I use this a lot in my coaching. I say, what's the worst that could happen, but also what's the best that could happen?
Yeah, exactly.
And usually when you get into that world of what's the best that can happen, it's like, holy crap, what huge opportunity. It's like, well, you weigh the cost and the the risk and the reward. It's almost always go get it.
And I also think you got to like really define what does, like, if you do fail, what does it actually mean? Like, okay, 99% of startups fail. Okay, let's actually map out what does it mean to fail, right? What, like, where are you actually at? Okay, you probably still have some money in the bank because you're probably paying yourself well as a founder. Like, you weren't eating peanuts like for dinner. You probably have an apartment still. You probably still have some savings. You have a massive network. You have a ton of learnings. Like you actually, if you compare that to where you were before, you probably would say you're maybe even a little bit better or ahead. And so like you can't think, you got to dive deeper. You can't just like stop at like the first thing of, oh, I failed. And like if people stop after that one thing, they're never going to go very far.
So that's funny because I have looked at this in the past because it was 90% back in the day. It was, what that really meant was 90% of startups fail to meet their investors' expectations.
Really? That's what it is?
Well, what do you consider a failure? If a company sort of continues on life support, or if you get a, kind of a flat exit, well, a lot of VCs would consider that a failure, right? Because they failed to realize the potential. But yeah, from a founder's perspective, it's, no, I learned a ton. I made a ton of connections. I had a lot of fun. Maybe I made some money or made my money back. Certainly I'd be better off than if I were working at a big company.
And also like, there's other things like, actually on this topic, because I think this is super interesting. There's like two other things that I've seen from people in my friend group that they've done when they've had failed companies. So the first one, and this one like really blew my mind. Like his company completely failed, and his investors were okay with him just holding on to the money, and they were like, just take the time to figure out what the next thing is. Like, don't rush. And we're talking about like him having like literally like $15 million in the bank account. And their investors are like, just keep it. Just like hold on to it. I'm sure you'll come up with another idea. And when you do that, because we have the equity in your company, you'll be fine. Like you'll go.
Oh, interesting.
And he like literally fired his entire team, and it's just him and his co-founder left. And when you're two people, like maybe you're burning like $300,000 a year, maybe, but like at a $15 million, you can go a long time. Like you can even live a really good life on that. And that one was really interesting. The other one I saw was, and this one shocked me even more, was he negotiated like some part of the money to be returned to him. So like this guy had, I think it was like 10 million in the bank when he decided to shut down the company. And he's like, hey, I'm instead of running this to the ground, I'm just going to give you investors the money back. So I have my reputation intact and so on. But he asked the investors if he could keep $1 million of it for him personally. And that was his way of saying, hey, basically, if you do that, I'll go to you the next time I want to race a round. Like you'll be my first investor. And as long as you trust me as a founder and you say this wasn't a founder problem, this was a product market fit problem, then it's actually a decent bet for the investor because they were probably writing off this entire thing anyways. So now instead of getting 0 back, they're getting 9 and he keeps $1 million. Right. So like, did he really like end up in a worse spot than he started? Probably not. Yeah. Like he probably did quite well.
That's interesting though, because that's sort of that fail fast mentality as well. That like, rather than holding on to this at all costs, we're going to say, we're going to fail. We're going to pivot. We're going to try something new and keep moving forward.
The best founders fail upwards. It's 100% true. Every time I've seen it, it's like the number one thing.
So I want to frame this as like systematizing failure. right? Because I imagine that through the course of your 7 companies now, is it 7 now or 8 now?
Yeah, I think it's 7.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back through LinkedIn history, but maybe someone message me later and say it's 8, but let's just say 7.
That you probably have, a thought process or decision-making framework around taking risk, facing failure head on, and learning and moving forward. So
yeah.
Through the course of let's kind of try to fast forward through, the 6 companies or 7 companies or whatever it is to get to today. How have you, again, sort of internalized and systematized the process of taking risk and failing?
It's a good question. So I think the first thing you got to do is understand why you want to take this bet. Like what is motivating you? What is the outcomes you're trying to achieve? Is this the right bet to be taking? Like maybe there's a different bet that's even higher risk but higher reward, or lower risk but lower reward, and maybe now is the time to take that bet instead. So like really understanding that is the first part, because if you don't understand that, the rest won't. The rest is meaningless. Then once you've done that, you really got to look at what's the pure upside and the pure downside. So like when I say pure, I mean like the absolutes, 100% bad, 100% good. And once you know those spectrums, it's like, are you okay with those spectrums? Obviously, with the 100% side, most of the time you're going to be like, I'm okay with that. But it's really the downside case that you got to really make sure you're aware of. And really think it through. This is the big one. And not just go like, oh, we failed, but like, again, going back to what we talked about before. And once you do that, then it's actually quite simple. You just commit. It's like really simple. You just like, you commit to it and you put all your effort into it. And what's really interesting about companies is it's bets on bets on bets, right? So like you have this like bet that you're taking on yourself that you can accomplish it. Then the investor is taking a bet on you that you can achieve this outcome. So they give you capital. And then employees are taking a bet on you that you can recruit people around them to collectively go to the promised land. And then you're also taking a bet on that employee that they will be able to pay off, that they will actually work in the team and achieve the outcome you want. And so it's just like a series of bets. And if you're afraid of taking bets, you don't have a company. I don't know what you have, but it's definitely not a company.
Yeah. That's funny. I've said something almost exactly the same, that like business is nothing but a series of bets. If you take away the bet, there is no business. At best, you have a job or you're a freelancer or something like that. But if you want to build a business, all you can do is make bets, and some are going to win, some are going to lose. You're going to win big ones, you're going to lose small ones, everything in between. And you just have to keep making bets.
I think you can even take it further. Like if we really want to get fun here, we can take it further. So like the two extremes, right? So one is life is a bet, right? Like all of your life, right? Like you've like actually a great example of this right now is like, look at the massive layoffs that are happening. That was actually a bet that you didn't even realize that's a bet, right? Yeah. So like you're taking bets regardless. It's just, what are the bets that you're willing to bear?
That's funny. So that's really interesting. I started my consulting company, well over a decade, maybe 15 years ago now, when I was working at a big tech company, and they were doing rounds of layoffs, right? So it was happening all around me, people dropping like flies. And thankfully I got lucky, even though I thought, well, my job is safe, but I knew in the back of my mind it wasn't. And so I started doing this consulting, and there was a time where I realized, wait a minute, if I have like 10 clients and I lose any number of them, I'm actually still okay. But if I lose this one job, I'm fucked.
Yeah.
And there was this moment where I was like, oh my God, everyone joins these companies thinking about job security, but the only real job security is actually to be the master of your own destiny and to have enough revenue coming from different sources that you can, it's diversification at the end of the day.
Well, even that, like, okay, we talked about one extreme, which is like, you have a normal job and there's a bet that you're placing on the company. And then let's really take it far out and let's look at the other extreme, which is like, you are a billionaire or something like that, and you don't need to work another day in your life. Well, you're still taking a bet. The bet that you're taking is that the currency you have will continue to be valid and continue to hold worth, right? Like, what if the country fucks up? So like you're not getting out of a bet.
Or if everything is in stock or tied up in stocks. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Like, so I don't know, like maybe you're in a different country and another country destabilizes your currency. That's like a most extreme thing, something that happens in movies, but that can happen, right?
Or you're on top of the world and then you say a bunch of dumb shit on Twitter and then you lose $1 trillion in value overnight. Who would have thought?
So everything's a bet. It's just, I think once you accept that, it becomes much, much easier to accept bigger bets.
Interesting. So in all of these different companies, is this more in hindsight, or did you face these companies, or these challenges head on with that thought process of like, I know I'm taking a risk. I know there's a chance of failure. And if it fails, I'm just going to move on as quickly as I can.
The earlier startups were very much a overly optimistic bet on myself. And I wouldn't go any further than that. I wouldn't say like I thought about it too deeply. If anything, that was probably part of the problem was I wasn't doing the right math on the bet. Like I made a good bet on myself. I didn't make a good bet on the product or the market or, I don't know, being able to generate customer demand or whatever it is. And I think over time, I've gotten a lot better at that. Even like with Doppler, there's definitely if we made a couple key decisions a little bit differently in the first year of incorporation, like when we were building out the initial set of product and pricing and all that, we'd probably be a different company there than we are now. Like we're doing it great now, but still there's a lot better we could have been if we made different bets earlier on. So I would say my thinking has evolved and I've learned like the depth of the bets. Before, when I was first starting, it was like I understood that there was a bet. Now I understand there's really like 100 bets. Yeah. And I'm not going to be able to go through all 100 day one, but I can go through like 30 now.
So let's talk about that, right? So all of this experience, all of these risks have taken you to start Doppler. So first off, what was the big problem or the gap in the market that put on the light bulb for you?
Yeah. So I was working on a previous project, which is a crypto machine learning marketplace, kind of all the buzzwords in one. And the way I'd sum up that experience was like pushing a boulder up a hill. You can move 1 foot forward, but you'd slip 5 feet back from exhaustion. There's no win in sight. And I was very, very frustrated. And so I decided to take a trip to Cancun to just like forget about it all. And my first day there, I was in a hot tub. And I was just like, man, there's nothing I can do to get this thing off the ground. So inspired by Stuart Butterfield, because I think he's probably the best at failing upwards. Like think about what he's done, right? He creates a video game that fails, Flicker's born out of it. Goes back and he's like, I'm going to create another video game. This time it's going to work. Fails, come out of it as Slack, right? And so I was just like, what can I learn from this failure? And what I saw was that I had a lot of problems managing environment variables and secrets in all these like weird, interesting ways. And a lot of them came back to like a single root problem. And it took me a while to get there, but like I finally realized that there was a root problem. And so I go to this dinner after I come back from Cancun that Stripe was hosting. And it was like it's called the Stripe Atlas Dinners. I don't know if they still do it, but they did it when I was getting started. And it was basically like 50 founders and developers in a room eating pizza. That's the sum of it. And just talking about whatever developers and founders are going to talk about. And I go to this room and I'm like, hey, I can't tell if I'm a terrible engineer or the world's broken. You tell me. And like 50, 60% of them were having this problem. And that was like, okay, there's something interesting here. It's not just me. And then I go and I start talking to other companies, big and small, like going and seeing what's happening at Uber, going and seeing what's happening at Lyft and Airbnb and so on. And it seemed like everyone was struggling. And it wasn't like they weren't trying to fix the problem. Like some of these companies were spending $500,000 to $5 million a year trying to fix this problem and still struggling.
And so what is the problem succinctly?
So let's first start off with what a secret is. So Doppler is, you can think of Doppler as like a password manager for secrets or like a GitHub for secrets. And a secret is basically a way to authenticate to another service. So you decide to start accepting payments. So you incorporate Stripe into your stack. And Stripe gives you an API key to authenticate to Stripe's API. And you store that API key, that secret, somewhere secure so that someone else doesn't get access to it. The wrong person doesn't get access to it and take malicious action. And so for me, the problems that I was seeing was a couple-fold. I had a contractor and it felt very weird giving this like very sensitive API key that could like drain all of our customers' credit cards to a contractor that I know I'm not going to work with long-term. And even after we stop working with them, they'll still have access to this key unless we do something about that, like rotate the secret, which is like revoking and issuing a new one. And so that felt broken. Another part that felt broken was managing it manually. Like if you think about how code is managed, like I have Git with GitHub and I push code to GitHub and then GitHub pushes code to production or staging or wherever. And secrets I'm like copying and pasting everywhere. And what ended up happening at one point through this like crypto machine learning marketplace is I eventually dropped the crypto part and I start doing just normal USD payments. And I had the Stripe production key and staging in the staging one in prod. And I wasn't doing transactions for like a week. And it took me like a week to realize I just put the wrong key in the wrong place. Going back to a copy paste issue. And so there was like all these different problems. Now, if you scale up to like much larger companies, there's a whole different set of problems. And the problems that they face is usually around risk. And so I'll tell you a quick story that kind of like illustrates the risk that like some of our bigger customers are facing today. They had a malicious actor in the company, and this malicious actor got access to 2,000 secrets. Right, that's a lot of secrets. And they found out about this malicious actor in the company. They exited that person or let them go. But the security team decided they had to rotate 2,000 secrets, basically revoke all the old locks and keys and issue new locks and keys to all these different services. And it took 3 security engineers 6 months to rotate them manually. Now you can do that with Doppler in about 10 seconds with a click of a button. And so like there's a spectrum of problems that are being faced in this industry. Some for developers and typically kind of small, usually around synchronization or organizational structure. And then there's a much larger set of problems for larger companies like managing risk. Like each company does not want to have their name in a TechCrunch article saying they just got breached and 10,000 records or 100,000 records of customer data is out in the wild, right? Like that's a really scary story. You can't repair that with money. That's going to take real brand reputational hit. And we help them protect against that.
Wow. Yeah, obviously super compelling. And I've experienced it myself many times. I hate to say how many times I've had to tell the engineers, like, you can't publish our API keys to
yes.
Plain text, like, you can't do it. And yet it's still,
this is the one TechCrunch article you don't want.
Exactly. One way or another, they find their way out there. So what's interesting to me here then is obviously the problem is super compelling. Then the question is like, well, why hasn't anybody else done it? Right. And I think as an entrepreneur, there's that seed of doubt that's like, it couldn't possibly be real, right? Like I must be crazy. Like you said, like if the world was broken, why hasn't anybody fixed it at this point? So in going through those conversations and those interviews, how did you validate that, that you weren't crazy basically? And how did you, find out that no, there actually is a real problem here. It's solvable and people just for some reason, haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, so the problem was pretty obvious. Like it was just like hearing people's pain points. I think more interestingly was the solution part of it. And it wasn't like there wasn't any solution in place. It was, in our case, the wrong solution was in place. And so if you think about this from like the entire conversation we just had was around security, right? And so who's going to know this problem the best? Security people. Who's going to eventually go and solve this? Security people. And the problem with that is they're not the end user. The end user is the developer, right? Like a security team of 5 people makes a choice that impacts 1,000 developers or 500 developers, some really big number. And the developers are the ones that are going to have to use it day in and day out. And if the tool isn't built for them, they're not going to use it. And then what's going to end up happening is you're not going to get any of the security benefits. And that was the big insight. That was the thing that unlocked it all for us, was that the tools were being built, but they were being built for the wrong persona. And they were being built by the wrong persona. It was security tools being built by security people for security people, when it really should have been developers building this for developers that will meet all the needs of DevOps and security. And that was the big unlock. And once you understand that fundamental piece, it completely changes how you build a product and address the problem.
Wow. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So in product discovery, we talk a lot about, customers versus users versus stakeholders, right? And really understanding you might have multiple personas, especially in an enterprise. You have the people that are actually using your product day to day. You have the customers, the people who are buying your product, which may be totally different. And then you have your stakeholders, the people whose, concerns and opinions matter in how the product needs to be built or what it needs to be done. So it sounds like, so when we talk about product market fit, okay, so obviously the big word, the big umbrella term for everything. When we talk about market, this is what we mean here. Market doesn't just mean enterprise companies or enterprise SaaS or whatever it is. The market actually drills all the way down into those personas as well.
Exactly.
So mapping out what's our macro level market segment, and then within that market segment, who are all the different personas? Who are your actors in various roles? Who are our customers? Who are our users? Who are our stakeholders? And it sounds like you made that. It wasn't the product necessarily. It wasn't even the market. It was that micro level factor that when the keys turn the right way, that you unlocked it.
And it wasn't, for us, it was interesting because like we didn't think about it in those terms. We were just like, hey, I'm a developer. I have secrets and I need to keep them secure. And I also want to do a bunch of productivity things with them too. Like it's not just a security problem. It's a productivity problem. And so for us, it was like we always had this like theme of like make vegetables taste like candy, right? We know there's some security requirements here. That's the vegetables, but it also like there's a productivity either problem or gain that can happen if you and that's the candy part. And so when we decided to approach it for developers, it was continue to build in that theme of making vegetables taste like candy. And then if you zoom out further and further to like where we are today, we kind of break it up into a couple. Like you said, there's stakeholders, right? The stakeholders are then developers, the end user. Then there's a champion. The champion in our case is the DevOps team. They're the ones who actually have the power to roll this out. They make a decision that every developer is impacted by. And then there are people that can veto an opportunity or a deal. That's security. And then there's the economic buyer, the one who actually signs on the dotted line, and that's the CTO. And so once you understand those personas, you can really start to craft the messaging and the positioning to address those the concerns they may have and also the benefits they're looking to get.
So tell me about the success that you've had so far. So obviously, tell me about where you're at today and kind of the scaling journey that you've had at Doppler.
Yeah. So I'd say I've always talked about Doppler as it's gone through 3 phases. And we're on the 3rd phase right now. So the first phase was like find a product that developers love, i.e. product market fit. And that phase was very much what I call Chipotle sales. It was back in the day before COVID, and it would be like, I didn't know anyone in Silicon Valley, like literally no one. Like all my friends were people that worked at Uber. And it was just like working my way through the friend networks to any developer that would want to talk to me, take them to Chipotle, and I'd say, I'm going to get a rant at you for an hour about this problem. And in return, I'll buy you anything on the menu. And that got us like 3 customers. And then we had a really
How much extra guacamole did you have to buy?
Quite a bit. And the funny part is I just like guacamole. So it was all for them. So that 3 turned into like 9 and kept multiplying at a decent rate. But it was all like almost Superhuman style, where Superhuman's like an email app. But what they do is they require you to have a meeting for 30 minutes to get onboarded. And we did the same thing to really understand our customers better. And at some point, we started hearing, hey, I don't want to refer my friend because I don't want them to have to go through this 30-minute call. I know the problem set. I know because they have the exact same problems I do, and I know the solution will work. Can't you just give them access? And we started hearing that a lot. And so at some point, we just opened up the gates where you could basically just sign up for the product and use it by itself. We didn't actually even have a marketing site at that time. It literally, if you went to Doppler.com, it was just a registration page. That's it. And I think it was like 1 line that tells you what it does. And immediately we saw this massive, massive jump in signups. Like we were going from like, I'm going off memory here, but let's just say 3 to 5 a day. We were, when it was manual onboarding with a 30-minute call, to something on the order of like 30 a day or something like that. Maybe 20. So it's like a pretty big jump. Like it felt like a big jump.
So I want to qualify this a bit because I really want to make sure that our audience doesn't misconstrue this. The onboarding interview is incredibly powerful when you're pre-product market fit, where the discovery process and the sales process are intertwined. So the superhuman model, as you describe it, has become a gold standard for ramping up prior to product market fit, because not only are you obviously ensuring that they're successful at a time where your onboarding system is probably a little bit clunky, right? But then also you're taking the opportunity to learn from them and have the interviews be, again, interwoven into your process. So I don't want anyone to misconstrue that they shouldn't do those things. It's just that there may be a certain point at which you can now flip the switch and move into more of a self-service model. And it sounds like you hit that point.
And I'll end with one other thing on this, which is to your point of it doesn't go away. You don't stop doing that. You just do it for different reasons. So like now today, we still do those customer calls, but we call them POCs, proof of concept. And we do it for larger accounts, customers that are going to pay us, I don't know, 10K to 30K and above, all the way up into the hundreds of thousands. So those calls are not going away. They just get systematized and they get turned into big deal accounts only.
So you took off the training wheel, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. You open up the gates and off they went. So what happened?
And off they went. And so it started growing. And we were like, okay, there's something here. And then we started hearing like, hey, why don't my friends know about this? Like, how can I get other people to know about this? And And so we decided, okay, I think we're ready for a launch. And so we did something I think a little bit different than other companies have done. We did like a 4-stage launch. So on Monday, we did a launch to Weiss. We were in Y Combinator at the time. And so Y Combinator has its own internal forum. And so we did a launch there. And that was Monday. Tuesday, I believe, and I'm going off memory, so maybe shifted one day in either direction. But I believe it was Tuesday we did a Hacker News launch. Sorry. We did a Product Hunt launch. And then Wednesday we did a Hacker News launch. And then Thursday we did I think it was a Forbes press launch. And so it was like a staggered thing. And the idea is like a build and build and build, and people could not stop hearing about it. And that worked really well. At the end of that week, we were growing at a much, much faster rate. And we've held that growth rate ever since that point and gone up from there. It did not slow down afterwards. And so I would say that was the second leg of it. So the first was finding product market fit. The second I call getting good at growth. And by the way, our journey is not done there. Now, when we have conversations internally, it's like, how do we grow hundreds per day instead of like 100 a day? My goal eventually, hopefully a year and a half from now, is like we're growing thousands per day. So that leg will never stop. That's just an ongoing mission, and we just unlocked that mission, if you say. And then the last leg, and this is the one that I think companies really the bigger companies really focus on for like the rest of the company lifespan, is monetization. Getting really good at monetizing, and we're at the very early start of that journey right now. So I would say we are at phase 3, and I would say we're at like 10 or 5% of phase 3.
Yeah. So let's talk about getting good at growth for a bit, because that's really kind of core thesis of the podcast and of my work as a coach as well. What were, you think, kind of the biggest roadblocks or stumbling blocks to growth that you had to unlock to get to that next level?
It's a good question. I think really understanding the user journey. So like, what does it take for a customer to become active on the platform? What are they looking, and what does activation mean? Is it, because I think a lot of companies have like their own version of activation, and then their users have a different thing. Like they're usually like, yeah, I just want to do this one thing. And then the company's like, oh, you have to like add users and add payments and like these 10 different things. And it's like the user's just like, I just wanted this one little value prop here. That's what I wanted. Yeah. And so really understanding that, I think, was the first big step. The second is like understanding what flow they have to go through to get it. So like, how much energy do they have to spend? Because it's really an investment, or how much energy do they have to invest to get to that reward? And then the last one is like, can you build in a loop? So, and this is something I think Doppler got decently lucky at, where we just happened to have people that refer other people, or they would, like we saw a couple interesting loops that could happen for you. One is people would share with their friends, they liked it. It actually surprisingly did not happen on Twitter or Facebook or any social media platform. It was literally just friends talking about it with other friends in conversations. Like, we always found it really weird. It's like, how are we growing like this when I don't see any activity on Twitter? Like, if you look at our Twitter, it's like, oh, you have like a couple hundred users, like, or followers. It's not that much. Like, how, like we're growing that per day. So like there has to be some level of communication going on. The second one is, so that's like, that's inbound referrals or organic referrals. The second loop you can build is like around user management. So user A invites user B to the company, and then user B brings it home to their side project, and then eventually leaves to go to the next company, and then brings it to that company, and just rinse and repeat, right? So people switching jobs, or people growing usage within that existing company. Yeah. That's another big lever, and you got to like really understand what those flows look like. And there may be some users that have a much bigger impact than other users. Like, if you're bringing in just another developer, that may not grow as fast as like bringing in like a DevOps lead who makes a decision and the whole company gets impacted by it. So understanding those flows and what that DevOps leader is trying to achieve may be different than the developer is trying to achieve. And if you can get the DevOps leader to be successful, then maybe you can get the entire company to be successful or grow and use and adopt the product.
So I want to go back to your first point here around the user journey. So I call it the jetpack to the aha moment. Kind of weird analogy, but so the aha moment is that time at which they've solved their problem, right? Where they've realized, oh my God, this thing is amazing. I'm going to use it. I'm going to tell my friends about it. And as you had mentioned, a lot of products put all of these roadblocks in the way. Setting up accounts, setting up user management, going through a lengthy tutorial process, reading a lot of documentation, whatever it may be, when they just want to get that thing done. And so many SaaS companies actually stand in the way of their customers achieving what they want to achieve. So I say putting on the jetpack. And what I mean by that is basically mapping out all the steps, all the grueling, detail that it takes to get to whatever that moment is, and then just ruthlessly cutting things out. Anything that you can either eliminate or defer, meaning so taking the training wheels off as much as possible. Anything that you don't have to teach them, anything that they don't have to submit as information, any step that they don't have to take right now to get them to that moment, cut it out and put it in later. So I think a lot of product designers think like they're thinking about it as like this one and done kind of thing, right? Before you can achieve value, we have to get all of this stuff set up, but not thinking about it really in the life or the life cycle of the customer, which is like the first session is just getting them to that point. Then all the other stuff can come later. Okay, cool. You want to set up an account? Cool. You want to set up billing? You want to add more users? You want to learn how to do this extra flow or learn how to use this extra feature? Cool. That all can come next. But right now, let's put on the jetpack and get you to that aha moment.
I'd say I'd add three more things to that because I think you're spot on, but there's three more things to add. One, the user journey will change depending on the user you're bringing on, right? So like if you are a product like ours that has multiple personas, right? We have up to 4, right? We have developers, we have DevOps, we have security, and sometimes we have a billing admin. Right. So like all those, like a billing admin does not want to touch secrets, nor should they. Right. So like understanding that persona is really, really important. That's the first one. The second is that you're going to have to redo it again and again and again, as the product evolves. We're actually doing this right now. So we had a great onboarding experience for Doppler 3 years ago. We actually have a very shitty onboarding experience, in my opinion, for Doppler now. We drive a lot more value. We have different things that we get people more excited about that are actually more value add than when we originally built the product. And so we're completely redoing our onboarding experience right now. And the best companies have dedicated teams to this that only focus on this, and they never stop. Like kind of going back to that thing of like phase 2 is not one and done. It's a mission that you just unlock that you never stop doing. Exactly that point. You never stop refining the onboarding process. Look, Airbnb is a great example of that. Airbnb's website changes like every 3 months and the flow changes like every 2 weeks. It's because they're constantly trying to get every last person through that funnel. So that's the second thing. And the third one, and this is something I didn't even understand until literally a couple months ago, so it's taken me a long time to learn this lesson, is pricing. Pricing is actually another really big part of onboarding. And it's because you're telling people how to think about things, right? Like if you go and you say, hey, the first user is free, and then every user after that you have to pay for, they're going to think very differently about adding a user versus if you say, we don't charge for user, we charge on something else like usage or something like that. And so you can have things where like you can have problems where the pricing actually blocks the outcome you're trying to achieve with onboarding. Or can enable it if it's set up the correct way. Like I think Stripe's a great example of this. Like Stripe's pricing is so fucking good in my opinion. Am I allowed to cuss on this? I don't know.
Sure.
It's so damn good if you want to replace the snippet. And the reason why is they don't charge by user. All they charge on is transaction. And it's like at the end of the day, companies want to make money. That's why you're in business. And so if you're willing to put up with the fee of Stripe, which is, what is it? 1.5% or 3% plus 30 cents, something like that. Whatever their fee is, like people basically accept it. That is something they're okay with. Everything else you get pretty much out of the platform included for the most part. And so I'm not deterred to add users. I'm not deterred to go try on new features and stuff.
Yeah. So I'm by no means an expert in pricing, but as a kind of a human-centered evangelist, I always think your pricing should be based on value, a unit of value, not a unit of cost. And so I think a lot of companies, again, will try a usage metric. They're like, well, this is how much it costs us to provide the service. So that's what we're going to charge you per user, per unit of thing that goes through the pipe or whatever it is, but not necessarily based on the unit of value that the customer is able to realize. And what that ends up doing is it ends up forcing a behavior where they are restricting themselves based on cost and not actually realizing and getting to that point where they're realizing the value of the product. So you, again, part of the jetpack is whatever it takes to get them to that point where they're realizing value. And then you both get a share of that value, right? At the end of the day.
And I think there's also an interesting thing of like thinking about what is the value you're driving, because in certain products, there's multiple value points that you're driving, right? It's not just one, especially if you really understand your persona. you build a really damn good product, you're probably driving multiple points of value. And so choosing what is the value metric you're going to charge on is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like in our case, we charge on seats. And the thesis is that every developer that gets on the platform, it makes it better for everyone else that they're on that platform, that you can now collaborate with your secrets and so on. I don't want to give the pitch of Doppler, but that's our thesis. But there's also another point of value, which is like we delivered a secret successfully into your application. And because of that, your application was able to boot up and run. And so that's another point of like, should we even think about charging on that? And we're always like, I think really good companies, one thing I've learned is they're always thinking about pricing. And it does get harder to change it over time, but at least they're always thinking about it.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about leadership. Obviously, after building and growing, founding many companies, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts and a lot of opinions on the matter. So do you have any sort of core leadership principles that drive you and drive the way you run your companies?
Yes, I do. And for what it's worth, some of them I'm getting better at. Like I'm not perfect at all of these. So the ones that I really care about, there's I think 3 that really, really matter a lot to me. And I wouldn't say these are things that I look for just in leaders. It's things I look for in every person that's at Doppler. And if you have these 3 things, you're going to be very well set up for whatever job you're going to be doing at Doppler. So the first one is we look for people that are super passionate. And you don't have to necessarily be passionate about our space, but you have to be a person that can become passionate, right? So like a good example that we talk about all the time at Doppler is we naively break up the world into 2 types of people, artists and assassins. Artists do it because they genuinely love it. They get fulfillment out of it. They oftentimes do it in their free time without getting paid for it. And it motivates them. And artists assassins only do the work when they get paid to pull the trigger. And we don't hire assassins at Doppler. We only hire artists. And generally, if you are a person that can get passionate about things, you can become passionate. You can learn to become passionate about Doppler. Actually, a really good example of this is our CTO. When we were first getting started, he said, "Hey, Brian, do not expect me to be passionate about Doppler day one. Give me a couple months." And now he's probably one of the most passionate people about Doppler, maybe even rivaling it with me. But it took him a while to learn that passion for Doppler. But he was a person that could get passionate. The second thing we look for is someone who has really strong skills and opinions in their craft. I'm not talking about someone with like a senior leader title or whatever. I'm talking about just like the raw things that would go into leveling them. Like, are they really good at their job? Or do they have strong opinions based on facts or based on experiences that we agree with and align with? And I think if you have people that are really passionate and very good at what they do, you can open up the third thing, which is ownership. We do not have what I like to call coding monkeys at Doppler or task monkeys. We have people that own things end to end. When you are given a project, we expect you to fully own it. And you're not owning the task, you're owning the outcome that the task is trying to accomplish. And if the task fails at accomplishing that outcome, then you have to find another task to go accomplish that outcome, or at least decide if this is an outcome you still care about and are worth investing in. But that's what it means to own things. And those are like the 3 pillars that we really, really look for in people. Now, there's other things that I think every company should look for on top of that, like, are they a jerk or not? Because you don't want to hire jerks. Are they good at collaborating? Are they especially good at, in a remote world, being okay collaborating out in the open and having a debate out in the open? That's actually surprisingly be kind of interesting for me to see over the years. Is like there's like the past job that someone is at really dictates how they're going to approach the next job. So we try to work in the open. So what does that mean? It means we have like a marketing channel or a sales channel or an engineering channel and in Slack, and people are talking there. They're debating there. We have Notion docs, and every Notion doc is available for everyone else to see, except for like private things like one-on-ones. And so there's this expectation that you'll work out in the open. And some people are extremely okay with that. Other people are like, oh, I did this at a previous company and my boss fired the person next to me because they debated with the boss in public. And there's like this fear mindset that they have that prevents them from actually working out in the open. And so a lot of times it's like you're going to have to do the work to break down that and break down those barriers by building trust and showing that you can actually debate with someone. And I often encourage people to debate with me as the CEO and tell me I'm wrong in a public setting. I'm very okay with that because all I care about is Doppler getting to the right outcome. I don't care if I was the person who came with that idea or not. It's about the company winning. And so there are things like that I think every company should have.
Yeah. So how do you as a leader foster and nurture that behavior, those values?
There's only one way, in my opinion, and that is the first set of hires. You got to be really careful about the first set of hires you make, because they will reinforce the cultural values in the existing team, and they will help you hire and hold that quality bar for future hires. And so then you get this like self-fulfilling loop where the next set of hires then go and get trained to the future set of hires. And we have this rule where we don't allow more than 45% of our team to be new within a 3-month window. And the reason for that is if you have more people that are new than existing, they can tip over the culture and change it. And so we got to give time for people to resonate into that culture. And so that's really the big thing. Like you can write down all these documents, but if you hire a jerk, there's no amount of putting no jerks in the document that's going to change that behavior, right? Like, or people that aren't passionate, you can't just say, I want you to be passionate. And they're like, I don't know what the hell that means. Like you really have to think deeply about your first set of hires and then really reinforce that behavior with them. And then months later, when you feel it's ready, expand the team past that.
Wow. So really fostering and nurturing culture intentionally. I do kind of talk about culture as like a bonsai tree, that you can't bend it, but you can shape it. It has to be something that you're paying attention to over long periods of time. And
what's really cool about that, I think, is I think it's actually a cheat code, in my opinion. Like if you think about cheat codes, it's like you do an action and you get an outsized impact, right? And you can write a Notion doc or something that says, these are our cultural values, but that's not going to work. And then people are like, oh, this is way harder to change cultural values. But if you just get a couple key hires, right, like your first 3 or 4, that's going to pay a massive amount of dividends, and that's going to keep paying and hopefully never stop paying. And in my mind, that's a cheat code.
Yeah, well, it's like you're seeding, you're sort of crafting the DNA of the company, and those have those butterfly effects, right? That will continue to grow beyond whatever influence you can have individually. Yeah.
Yep.
So what are your sort of biggest leadership challenges or areas for growth that you're working on today?
Well, I think we're early in building out our executive teams. That's one big area, right? We have a VP of go-to-market, which is actually something that we haven't seen in many companies. We chose to make this decision where we have our VP of go-to-market owns sales, marketing, and DevRel. And the idea is that we want a holistic motion that all connects together versus kind of like all these independent leaders kind of building in their own directions. So that's one big area that we just made this bet on literally very recently, like 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And supporting that and making sure that leader can be successful at Doppler. So that's one big area of leadership. The second is over time. This is something that we have struggled with so much, is around hiring a head of people. And we have an amazing culture at Doppler. It's probably one of the things I'm most proud about of our company. And I'm terrified of losing it someday, like absolutely terrified of it. And you usually lose it as you scale. And so the thinking is we want to get a head of people someday, not immediately, but maybe like 6-8 months from now, that can continue to be for the people and foster that culture and grow it and scale it. We've made 2 mistakes in the past. And I don't want to go too much into it, but basically both times we thought we were hiring someone that was for the people, and they ended up being a person that was really for the company, and that usually that means HR. And it was the exact opposite impact that we were trying to create. And so I don't know necessarily what the right solution is to hiring a head of people. Something tells me it's not going to be hiring a previous head of people. It's going to be hiring someone in an adjacent role, like a previous founder who led operations. Or I think a really good one is an executive coach. Like I have an executive coach, and we tell her all the time, we would love to hire you and bring you on because she is probably the best person I know of at managing culture and people and all the intricacies that come with it.
I'm an executive coach. I do get that.
Yeah, so you'd probably be an amazing head of people because you actually give a shit about people and how they work together and their personal lives and such. Where I think usually typical head of people's don't. They care about more like protecting the company from a policies perspective, and you can quickly unwind all the great work you've done on culture by bringing a person like that on.
But what about so a lot of these around making the right hire? So obviously that sounds like a really important leadership philosophy for you is hire the right people.
Oh, absolutely.
But what about you personally, internally, as a leader? How you show up, or how you lead, or how you communicate, where you feel you're the most mindful of and work the hardest?
So I think there are 2 areas that I'm trying to be better at. And I say try to be better at because I am not good at today, but I need to get better at. And this is, again, going back to like working the open. I'm very cool talking about my failures and how I'm trying to improve. It doesn't bother me one bit. And I think good CEOs should be that for whoever's listening. So the first one is around communication. I tend to be, I come from a developer world, and in developer world, you usually say it once and you expect everyone to get it and you move on. If you have to say it more than 2 or 3 times, it means that you're not talking to the right person for whatever reason. Maybe they're not the right skill level, or they're not passionate about the project, whatever it is. But as a CEO, as a leader, you have to constantly repeat yourself. And it's a very unnatural thing to just like know that you're going to have to say the same thing again and again and again and again. And even when people are getting it, you're going to have to keep saying it, because maybe they fall out of it and they forget. Like if you stop saying it, they'll think the CEO doesn't care about it anymore, and then it's gone. And so that is something, constant communication and repetitive communication is something that I need to work on. The other one is going back to this developer mindset. So for any developer out there that is trying to build a company, I can tell you it's a very hard journey. I know the movies make it look easy, but it's actually far harder than you'd think. And this goes back to the second thing. When you're an engineer, you have a very immediate feedback loop. And so what that means is that if something doesn't work, you know quickly. If something does work, it worked, you know very quickly. And usually as an engineer, what that means is when it doesn't work, you don't get that mad. And when it's amazing, and when it works, you're amazed and you get that massive dopamine hit. Well, as a leader, it doesn't work that way anymore. What it means is you make a bet, and on a person, on a strategy, on a project, whatever it is, and you wait 3 to 6 months to find out if that works. And so that means you have to do 2 things really well. One, you have to get very okay with that. And the second is you have to really make sure that whatever you choose to work on is the highest impact thing in the company. And there are times where like I really struggle with this, where I'm thinking, oh, there's this part of this business that isn't doing well, we need to fix it. But it'd be so much easier if I could just go code, right? I can go get an instant dopamine hit if I go do that, but that's not the highest impact thing I could be working on at that time. And it's constantly reminding myself, my job as a CEO is to work on the highest impact thing, because if I make a decision, that ripples out to the rest of the company, or at least a very large percentage of the company.
You just blew my mind, actually. So I mentioned earlier this concept kind of around around making bets, business being about making bets, and that's actually exactly my journey. So I'm a CTO. I come from the developer background, and I'm used to having tight feedback loops. And I'm an agile evangelist, so everything about agile development is about tight feedback loops. And so when I go into starting my own business, the hardest thing for me was to accept longer feedback loops.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until just the past year that I actually had some of that realization that's like, I got to let some of this stuff ride. And I've got to take bets that maybe they're not big in size, but they're longer bets that I have to be comfortable with. And I think that's you're sort of framing something that I kind of stumbled into myself over the last year.
Yeah, I stumbled into it too last year as well. And like the other hard part is like, if you're so used to an immediate feedback cycle, you can actually cripple your own initiative, right? Like a good example is like you bring on a leader to take on an initiative, and this is like a 6-month journey. And at month 1, you're like, "How you doing? Or do you have the plan? What's the?" And they're like, "Dude, I just got here. Like, give me a break. Like, let me get the lay of the land. Like, I'm 1 month into my onboarding. You know what I mean?" But you're like, as a developer, you're so used to that instant gratification, and what you're telling that person is like, "I don't trust you," and that's going to fundamentally break down your relationship with them and the outcomes you want them to achieve. And so that has been an incredibly hard journey for me of like untraining myself as a developer to think more as a leader.
So really, this is interesting. So this podcast right here that we're on is an example of this, where, building a successful podcast, who knows how long it takes, right? It can take years. It may never happen. And it was one of those things where, to me, it was a bet where I had to really think about the future and ask myself, what's the best that could happen, the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is I meet some really cool people and have really fun conversations. The best that could happen is this can, translate into thought leadership, that can create great opportunities, that can translate into books and all these other things, right? There's all these amazing things that could happen if this is successful, but it's going to take a long time, and I won't know until I get there. And actually pulling the trigger and starting this podcast, I had to go through this exact exercise, and it was really, really hard for me. It was actually a really difficult thing for me to do. So that was super poignant. I appreciate that.
Happy to help. I mean, I'm going through the same pains you are, man. So like, I get it. I was actually talking to my co-founder yesterday on this exact thing of like, when we were first getting started, people used to say running a startup is hard, building a startup is hard, making it successful is even harder. Mm-hmm. And I was like, one in the beginning, I was like, like, it can't be that hard, can it? Like, just need to write some code, get someone else to write some code with me. And it's a really hard job. It's a really, and part of why it's hard is because you're fighting against what you learned previously. And like being a leader is an unnatural thing. Like it's, or being a leader of this size is an unnatural thing. Like I think you can be a leader of like a 5-person team, whatever, pretty quickly. But like when you get to 20, when you get to 30, when you start having to worry about different products and different things, like you have a sales motion and a product motion and all these things have to connect together, it becomes a lot more challenging. And you have to like keep this entire chessboard in your head and make sure all the pieces are going in the right directions at the right times, even if they don't feel obvious, even if they feel bad at times, because you know that this is the outcome or the goal that you're trying to achieve. And that's really freaking hard.
It's a very broad set of challenges and skills. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've one more big question for you. So you mentioned that you have an executive coach. So tell me about your thoughts or your opinions around executive coaching in general.
I'm a huge fan. I think every founder should. I mean, to the degree that pretty much every executive at Doppler has an exec coach, has the same exec coach. And it has helped us so many times. We've had a couple moments in the company where like we legitimately thought we were going to lose some great people, and she helped us unwind that and recover from it. So I would say an exec coach helps on a couple levels. One, a really good one can also just be your therapist, and so you can vent at times when needed. That's really helpful. Two, they can help you understand that either the problem that you're facing is actually part of a bigger problem, like a symptom of a bigger problem, or that you're approaching the solution in a different way. And so they can kind of like help you, like imagine, actually a good example of this is like, imagine you have like this problem, and this problem is like super pressing. So it's like literally in your face, right? And all you can see is this problem. And then what that exec coach allows you to do is like pull the hand back a little bit and realize that the thing that's in your hand is actually a ball, and you can look at it in 3-dimensional space and see all the different angles of that problem, and really understand that problem, and then go and attack that problem and try to solve it. And I think exec coaches are really, really good at that. They're good at like pulling the problem out of you and allowing you to see the full scope of it. Another good thing that they help with is they help you take feedback. So this happens in a number of different ways. That could be like, I've had times where like someone's like, Brian, you're fucking up, and like these are XYZ things. There are other times where like people just don't know how to tell the CEO they're fucking up. And so what we do is we do what we call 360-degree feedbacks, where the exec coach meets with all these different people that I selected that I think are important for the company and to give me feedback. And they go vent to her. And then she summarizes all that feedback and anonymizes it, so I can't know who did it. And she pulls out the big takeaways. And then we have a hit list of things that I need to improve on. And like every year I get my new hit list of things I need to improve on. And our other executives do the same. And that's a really good way to kind of like allow employees to feel like they're being heard and really decide, like she will go and decipher what they're really trying to say. Like an employee could say one thing when really mean a different thing. And like, that's where I think the feedback form is like some executives I've seen do this, where they'll send out like this massive feedback form that's anonymous, and people just like fill out all the answers. But now it's on the CEO's job to like take that, process it, internalize it, and act on it, versus more of this other person that knows you really well because they spent a year talking with you, and then can also like dive deeper and ask follow-up questions with that other person and get to the root of the problems, and then surface only the highest impact things to you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. So, obviously that's what I do as well. The model I like to use, or the metaphor is, you are an intellectual athlete, right?
Yeah.
That is playing a professional sport at the highest level. If you are a startup founder in the world today, it is an incredibly competitive game, and game time is every single day.
Yep.
24 hours a day, you're on, right?
100%.
And so what professional sport do the athletes not have professional coaches? None. Zero. Not a single one, right? So how can you possibly expect to compete and win in one of the most competitive, high stakes games in the world without somebody in your corner like that, who can guide you, who can give you perspective, who can hold you accountable, who can call you out on your bullshit, right? And ultimately be there to support you, be your therapist, be your friend, your confidant, and so on. So yeah, I think we've moved past the phase where having an executive coach is sort of a luxury And now it's table stakes. You if you want to be successful in this game, you got to have one, and you got to have a good one.
I agree.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, she's helped us with so many problems over the years. Any founder that doesn't have one, you're either some anomaly, super successful person, or you have some really hard times ahead of you with no help.
Yeah. Yeah. And the hard times are, coming for all of us one day or another, right? We all deal with it.
Yeah. Get the help.
It's better to have somebody there. Yeah. To help you.
Also, there's no shame in it, right? Like at the end of the day, you're measured by your outcomes, right? So like whatever inputs you need to get to that outcome.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm loving the generational shift around, the stigma around getting help has gone away. I'm kind of at the tail end of the generation, or the beginning, I guess, of the generation that like, it's not a stigma to have a therapist. We talk about, oh my gosh, my therapist is amazing. Who's your therapist, whatever it is. And I think coaching is the same way. At one point, it may have been seen as, well, you're less than perfect if you need help. But now it's like, no. Like I need help. I get help, and I've got the best to help me.
Oh yeah. There's actually a really interesting insight that I had about this that I think really fundamentally changed my opinion about a lot of things that I think is exactly spot on for this conversation, which is there's been, I think up until now, like you just said, everyone had to put on this face that like they're perfect and you can't be not perfect. And I've come to a completely different realization. Everyone and everything is completely fucked up. And it's just how less fucked up are you? Like I'm fucked up as a person, but my goal is to be less and less fucked up over time. And like the fuck up part is actually really interesting because again, it goes back to that whole space analogy. Like if you think about like a fuck up as like the black space, like in surrounding the earth, it's like, that's your opportunity zone. Like an executive coach can exist because I'm fucked up. Doppler can exist because secrets management is fucked up. Yeah. Google can exist because search is fucked up. Like the fuck up is the opportunity there. It's not a bad thing. It's a blessing. It's a good thing. And you just need to rebrand it mentally and think about it that way.
I love it. Yeah. No, I mean, that's true, right? If there's one thing I've learned about being an executive coach and advisor, I've been working with founders for almost 20 years. And it didn't take long to dispel this notion that CEOs and founders are somehow perfect or
not
really amazing. We're just human, right? And I think the difference is just founders are the ones that are willing to see it in that way, that are zigging when others zag, that are willing to put themselves out there and take a risk and pick themselves up and dust themselves off when they fail and keep moving forward.
I promise you, we're broken in different ways, but we're still broken. And that's okay. Like you can be broken and still be successful. No one's perfect. And perfect is boring.
Well, Brian, I can talk to you forever. I've had an incredible conversation with you. I can see it's getting dark in both of our offices. So I think we could wrap it up here, but it's been such a pleasure. I really, I'm grateful for you being on the show today. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much as well. Really appreciate it.